Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Western Tales. Today, I want to share with you a story about how one act of courage in a storm changed the course of two lives forever. It's called The Widow of Iron Creek. The snow began before dawn, that February morning fine, powdery flakes that thickened into a curtain by sunrise. By noon, the mining town of Iron Creek had vanished beneath a white silence so deep it could swallow a man whole. Wind howled through the gaps in the boardwalk, carrying the smell of smoke and pine sap. Inside her little general store, Clara Hensley stacked flour sacks along the wall, the way she'd done 1,000 times before, steady, efficient. Alone, Clara was 39, a widow for almost 4 years now. Her husband, Henry, had died in the shaft collapse that took 14 miners one dark autumn afternoon. Since then, she'd learned to do everything herself, hauling feed, keeping books, fighting off both pity and unwanted suitors. The town respected her work, but not her independence. That day, when the wind shifted, she heard something, not the moan of the storm, but a cry, a child's cry. She dropped the ledger, hurried to the frosted window, and saw movement on the road. Through the white blur, she caught sight of a wagon overturned in the snow, a wheel still spinning weakly. Two small figures knelt beside it, one calling out, one clinging to the other, and on the ground a man, face down in the drift, unmoving. Clara didn't think. She grabbed her shawl, pulled on her coat, and stepped out into the storm. The wind cut through her like knives, but she kept moving, boots zinking deep. The children turned toward her, a boy, maybe 10, a little girl half his age, both red-cheeked and terrified. "Ma'am," the boy stammered. "He won't wake up. Papa won't wake up." Clara knelt, brushing snow from the man's shoulders. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and still breathing barely. She recognized him then. Elias Ward, the rancher who lived 5 miles north, the one folks said worked his land like he was trying to outrun something. A widower, same as her. The gossip never stopped about him, either. Behind her, voices rose from the boardwalk. A few men had gathered outside the saloon, staring through the swirling snow. "Leave it, Clara," someone called. "Ain't proper for a woman alone to be dragging a man home." She didn't answer. She didn't even look up. In Iron Creek, she'd once told herself, a woman waits for permission, or she does what needs doing. She chose the second. "Get my sled," she told the boy. "Quickly now." He hesitated, then ran. The girl clutched Clara's skirt, sobbing. "It's all right, sweetheart," Clara said softly. "We'll get him warm soon, together." She and the boy heaved Elias onto the sled. He was heavy, the kind of weight that spoke of years spent working the earth. His coat was stiff with frost, his face pale beneath the stubble. Clara wrapped him in her shawl, ignoring the whispers from the street. The snow thickened, erasing everything but the sound of the wind and the creak of the sled runners. She took the reins, her jaw tight, eyes on the road ahead. Behind her, the children huddled close to their father, silent now, trusting her without words. The trail to her cabin wound along the frozen creek, through stands of bare cottonwood. Snowflakes swirled like ghosts in the lantern light. Once, the sled hit a rut and nearly overturned. The boy cried out, but Clara steadied it with one hand, whispering, "Not yet. Lord, Not yet. By the time they reached her cabin, the world was a blur of white and wind. She dragged Elias inside, close to the fire, and the warmth hit her like a wall. Steam rose from his clothes. His skin was ice cold to the touch. She sent the boy for water, peeled the coat from his shoulders, and pressed her hand against his neck. The pulse was there, faint but steady. He'd live, if she could keep him warm and breathing through the night. As she worked, she heard the faint laughter of the children by the fire. Half asleep now, something in her chest loosened. It had been years since another person's laughter filled this cabin. Outside, the storm gathered strength, hammering the walls with snow. Iron Creek disappeared under the white weight of winter. But inside that small cabin, firelight flickered over faces: one woman, two children, and a man who'd fallen from his horse into her life. Clara sat back finally, breathless, watching the flames. The wind screamed through the chimney like a warning. She didn't know it yet, but the choice she'd made that night to stop, to help, to defy the town's cold rules would bind her fate to his forever. Because sometimes, out on the frontier, mercy is the only thing more dangerous than the storm itself. When Elias Ward woke, the world was quiet, except for the crackle of a fire and the hiss of wind against the window panes. For a long moment, he didn't know where he was. The ceiling above him was made of hand-hewn logs, smoke-stained but solid. The air smelled faintly of pine and something warm broth. Maybe? He tried to sit up, but his head swam. A woman's voice stopped him. "Easy now. You've been out for 2 days." He turned his head and saw her, Clara Hensley. Sleeves rolled, hair loose around her shoulders. The look of someone who'd worked through exhaustion and kept going anyway. Beside the fire, 2 children lay under kilts, sleeping. His children, safe. Elias swallowed hard. I should be home. The stock, they're fine," Clara said. "Your horses are in the barn. The rest will wait. You won't last an hour outside." He looked at her then, really looked the firm line of her mouth, the tired strength in her eyes. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Pride had a way of silencing a man when gratitude might have saved him. Outside, the storm roared, shaking the shutters like a beast trying to claw its way in. Inside, the fire snapped and the children breathed softly. Clara poured tea into a tin cup and handed it to him. "Willow bark," she said. "For the fever?" He hesitated, then took it. Bitter, but warm. It burned all the way down, and for a moment he felt human again. "Why'd you do it?" he asked after a while. "Bring me here." Clara didn't look up from the hearth, because no one else was moving. He turned that over in his mind, simple words, spoken like a truth she'd long accepted. He wanted to thank her, but his throat wouldn't form the words. The storm kept them there for 4 more days. Days that blurred into one another: firelight, chores, the creak of the roof under heavy snow. When the wind howled too hard, Clara checked the barn, lantern in hand. Elias tried to help, but his strength hadn't returned. She worked without complaint, steady as the ticking of a clock. The children grew fond of her quickly. The boy followed her everywhere, asking questions. The little girl clung to her skirts. Drawn by something gentle she must have felt beneath that no-nonsense voice. Elias watched it all, silent from the bed. He'd forgotten how it felt to hear laughter inside a house. His home had been quiet since the day his wife, Anna, died. 3 years of quiet. He'd told himself that needing no one was strength. But as the storm raged, that lie began to thaw. One evening, Clara sat by the window mending a coat. Elias said, "You live alone out here." "I do. No family left." She shook her head. "The mine took my husband. Took a lot of men that year." She tied a knot in the thread, her voice steady but low. "After that, I learned not to wait for help." The fire popped. Elias looked at her roughened hands, the way the light caught the curve of her cheek. He wanted to tell her he understood that he, too, had been living with a ghost. But words failed him. Instead, he said quietly, "You've built yourself a fortress." Clara smiled without warmth. "A small one, but it keeps out the wind." They said little more that night. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and relentless. Each hour that passed sealed them further inside their isolation, yet somehow, the air between them grew less cold. By the fourth day, the storm began to ease. Sunlight filtered weakly through the frost on the window, turning everything gold. Elias sat by the fire, his strength returning. Clara poured coffee and set a plate of biscuits on the table. He noticed the way her shoulders relaxed for the first time in days, like a soldier lowering her guard. The children were laughing again, carving shapes in the frost on the window. For a fleeting second, the cabin didn't feel like a place of refuge. It felt like a home. Elias looked at Clara. "Storm's breaking," he said. She nodded. "Soon you'll be able to go." But neither of them smiled. Both knew the same thing, that once the snow cleared, the silence between them would be replaced by the noise of the world gossip, judgment, duty. And yet, something unspoken had already taken root in that quiet house, fragile as the first thaw, but alive, out here, Clara said softly, more to herself than to him. "A storm doesn't ask permission. It just shows you who you really are." Elias watched her tend the fire, her face lit by its glow, and thought, maybe storms aren't sent to destroy us. Maybe they come to reveal who we still have left to save. The storm broke 3 days later. When morning came, the light was blinding, the kind of cold, clean brightness that follows a long fight with the dark. Iron Creek shimmered under a shell of ice and snow. Quiet again, as if nothing had happened. But something had. By noon, Clara Hensley hitched her mule and helped Elias Ward and his children back toward their ranch. The wagon creaked along the frozen road, past drifts taller than fence posts. The boy, Samuel, waved to her from the back, calling out a thank you as they turned north. Clara lifted a hand, smiling just enough to hide what she felt, the ache that comes when something begins and ends in the same breath. When she returned to town, the air had already changed. Heads turned when she passed. Mrs. Dugan at the post office lowered her voice mid-sentence. Two miners, standing outside the saloon, paused their cards long enough to whisper. And from the church steeple, the bell rang, calling folks to Sunday service. Inside, Reverend Langley stood before his congregation, Bible open, voice heavy as the frost. He spoke of virtue, restraint, and the temptations that come when storms confine men and women to unchaperoned quarters. He never said Clara's name, he didn't have to. The whole room already knew the story as they imagined it. Clara sat in the back pew, spine straight, eyes forward. She'd been through worse storms, worse silences, but even she could feel the sting of eyes that turned polite respect into quiet judgment. After service, she stepped out into the cold sunlight, nodding to those who dared to meet her gaze. Most didn't. The only one who did was Mr. Hobson, the town banker. He tipped his hat with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Hensley," he said, "a word about your account when you have a moment." She knew the look the kind men gave when they smelled weakness and debt. That afternoon, in the small room behind her store, Clara opened the ledger. The numbers hadn't lied, 3 months behind on payment. The snow had stopped customers for weeks. The shelves were thin, and the next shipment hadn't made it through. Still, she squared her shoulders. She'd pay what she owed. She always did. That evening, as she swept the boardwalk outside, she saw Elias ride into town with his children. He dismounted stiffly, still not fully recovered, and crossed the street toward her, his hat in his hands. "Clara," he began quietly, "I wanted to thank you proper this time." She looked up, the broom pausing mid-sweep. "You already did," she said. "By getting well enough to ride home. I owe you more than that. You owe me nothing. Just take care of those children." A pause hung between them. From across the street, she could feel the eyes of half the town peering through lace curtains, pretending not to. It wasn't the first time she'd been judged, but it was the first time she hated that he'd be judged with her. Elias glanced toward the saloon windows. "They'll talk no matter what I say," he murmured. "They will," she answered. "But talk's just wind. It only chills you if you stand still too long." He gave a faint, weary smile, the kind of smile that held both gratitude and shame. "I don't stand still much." "Good," she said softly. "Then keep moving." He nodded and left her there, snow crunching under his boots. When his wagon disappeared beyond the ridge, Clara turned back to her store. The bell above the door jingled. Mrs. Dugan stepped in, pretending to browse, pretending not to stare. The air inside felt smaller somehow. Even the clock ticked quieter, as though afraid to be overheard. That night, alone by the fire, Clara mended a tear in her apron and tried not to think about the silence pressing at the windows. Outside, the snow glowed under a half moon, beautiful and empty. Inside, the lamp's flame flickered against the walls, her only company. She thought of Elias and the children, probably asleep by now, safe and warm. And she told herself that was enough, that she didn't need thanks or company or forgiveness from a town that measured decency in whispers. But the truth was harder. After years of solitude, she'd grown used to being alone, but not to being misunderstood. That was the part that stung, that mercy could be twisted into shame, that kindness could become suspicion overnight. She poured herself a cup of coffee gone cold and stared into the fire. The flames bent and danced, shadows moving like faces in the smoke. In a small town, she thought, mercy travels slower than rumor. And as the wind began to rise again outside, she wrapped her shawl tighter and whispered to no one, "Let them talk. The storm's not through with me yet." The thaw came slowly that year, hesitant, uncertain, as if winter wasn't quite ready to let go. March sunlight melted the drifts into patches of slush, and the river that had slept under ice all season began to whisper again beneath its frozen skin. Life in Iron Creek returned to its rhythm, wagons creaking, hammer blows ringing, gossip blooming like wild flowers after snow. But for Clara Hensley, something had changed. Since the storm, her days felt quieter, not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that hums beneath your ribs. Sometimes, she'd pause while stacking flour sacks, half expecting to hear a child's laugh by the door. or see a tall, quiet man glance in with a nod. But Elias Ward had kept his distance. He was a man who carried his dignity like armor, and pride, Clara knew, was the heaviest thing a widower could lift. Still, the town had a way of forcing paths to cross. It was a Sunday afternoon, pale light shimmering on the river near Elias's land. Clara had ridden out with a basket of bread and herbs, a peace offering, she told herself, though no apology had been asked for. The children spotted her from the porch and ran to meet her, full of that restless spring energy. Elias followed, slower, hat in hand, an expression caught somewhere between gratitude and surprise. They talked a little polite, guarded talk, about the feed shipment, about the weather. Nothing that mattered. Everything that did, after a while. Clara noticed the children playing near the riverbank, too close to where the ice still glazed the surface. Stay back from that water, Elias called. But they were laughing, chasing each other across the half-melted snow. Then came the sound, a sharp crack, like the world taking a breath. Clara turned just in time to see the girl Lydia vanish through the ice. Elias shouted her name and was running before the echo faded. Clara followed, skirts heavy, boots sinking into the slush. Another crack split the air as Elias hit the edge, plunging into the black water after his daughter. The current beneath the ice was strong. Clara dropped to her knees, searching for the hole, the faint movement below. Without thinking, she dove. The shock of the cold stole her breath, her mind. Everything but the single thought, get the child. Underwater. The world was silent and dim. She caught a glimpse of fabric, a small arm, Elias's coat sleeve, and reached. Her fingers found Lydia's cloak, yanked hard, forcing both of them upward. They broke through the surface together, gasping, dragging the girl toward shore, where Elias's hands reached out, pulling them both free. By the time they stumbled inside the cabin, their clothes were frozen stiff. Clara's hands shook so badly she could hardly hold the matches to light the fire. Elias wrapped his daughter in blankets, rubbing her arms, his voice raw with terror. Lydia, come on now. Breathe. Sweetheart. Breathe, the girl coughed. A thin sound that grew stronger with each breath. Then came a cry, weak, but alive. Elias slumped to his knees, covering his face, shoulders trembling. Clara leaned against the table, hands trembling uncontrollably. She stared at them, father and daughter, clinging to each other, and the memory came like a knife she'd kept buried too long. 2 small graves behind her old cabin, 2 names carved by her own hand. She hadn't spoken them aloud in years. When she finally did, her voice was little more than a whisper. I lost 2 babies, both before they ever took a breath. Elias lifted his head slowly. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The firelight flickered between them, and something unspoken passed in the space that grief makes sacred. After a while, he said quietly, when Anna, my wife, was dying, she made me promise. Said, find them a mother someday. Someone kind. He swallowed hard. I told her I would. But every woman since looked at me like a duty, not a man. I thought I could do it alone. Thought needing anyone again was weakness. Clara met his eyes. It's not weakness, she said softly. It's just human. Outside, the wind had died. Only the river moved slow, thawing, alive again. Elias sat back. Exhaustion etched deep into his face. Clara took the kettle from the stove, poured 2 cups of tea, and set one in front of him. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was warm, fragile, like the world learning how to breathe again after winter. He reached out then, almost unconsciously, brushing her cold fingers with his. She didn't pull away, but neither did she hold on. Some things, both of them knew, couldn't be named yet, out there on the frontier. A storm could break a man, or it could thaw what he'd buried. And that night by the fire, grief met its reflection and saw the faint, trembling outline of hope. Spring came late to Iron Creek that year. The thaw turned roads to rivers and the air to mud, a season that revealed everything winter had hidden. And with it came Mr. Hobson, the banker, carrying papers that could break a life faster than any storm. Clara was behind the counter when the doorbell jingled. She looked up, expecting a customer. Instead, she saw the gray suit, the polished boots, the smile that never reached the eyes. Mrs. Hensley, Hobson said, removing his gloves one finger at a time. I believe we have business to discuss. He laid the folded documents on the counter. The sound they made was quiet, but heavy. Your account is 3 months in arrears, he said smoothly. I've been patient, truly, but patience, like credit, has its limits. Clara's hands were steady as she unfolded the paper. The words stared up at her like a noose. Foreclosure in 30 days. Her store, her home, everything she'd built since Henry's death, gone. She met his eyes. You'll have your money. I've a shipment coming next week. The mine reopened. Trade'll pick up. Hobson leaned closer, voice soft as silk. You've said that before. We both know the winter was hard. The men still owe on their tabs. And you, Mrs. Hensley, his gaze drifted down, then back to her face. You've been very charitable with your time, taking in strangers, caring for widowers. Generosity is admirable, but it doesn't pay interest. Clara's jaw tightened. If you came to insult me, you've wasted the trip. Oh, not at all. He said, I came to offer you a way out. He waited, letting the words hang. She didn't answer. I'm a reasonable man, he continued, and I've no wish to see you lose everything. So here's my proposal, simple and decent. Marry me. I'll forgive the debt in full. You'll have security, a home, and my name to protect yours, for a heartbeat. There was only the crackle of the stove and the soft tick of the clock. Then Clara laughed low, bitter, without mirth. You'd wipe my debt for my name, or for the gossip that makes you itch. His expression hardened. For practicality, Mrs. Hensley, you're not a young woman. You've no kin, no savings. How long do you think the town's respect will last once the bank nails its notice to your door? Longer than your kindness, she said quietly. For the first time, his smile faltered. He gathered the papers and tapped them against the counter. 30 days, he said. Think on it. Then he turned and walked out, boots leaving neat prints in the wet dust. When the door closed, Clara let the strength drain from her shoulders. Her hands trembled as she reached for the ledger. Not from weakness, but from fury. A marriage of convenience, the oldest trap in the West. Respectability for sale. Paid in silence. Outside. Thunder rolled across the hills, spring's second storm gathering. Inside, she whispered to herself. Not me. Not this way. A few miles north, Elias Ward was fighting a quieter battle. He'd been summoned, really, to tea with Reverend Langley and Mrs. Cottrell, the town's self-appointed matchmaker. He'd hoped to decline, but the Reverend's letter had mentioned concerns for the children's welfare. That phrase alone could ruin a man if ignored. He arrived on time, hat in hand, shoulders square. Mrs. Cottrell poured tea with a smile, too sweet to trust. Reverend Langley opened the conversation. "Brother Ward," he began, "you've been a pillar of perseverance. The town admires your devotion to those little ones. But a household without a mother," he paused, letting the implication settle. Mrs. Cottrell leaned forward. "I've written to a lady in St. Louis, a widow, refined, modest, very proper. She's agreed to visit. I believe she'd suit you well." Elias stared into his cup. "You've arranged this without asking me." She smiled. "Sometimes Providence needs a nudge." Reverend Langley nodded solemnly. "It's what's right for your children and your reputation. A man alone invites speculation." Elias said nothing. He'd lived long enough to know that in a small town, silence could sound like agreement. So he nodded once slow, reluctant. Mrs. Cottrell beamed. "Splendid. She arrives on the spring train." The conversation moved on to trivial things: the harvest, the weather, but Elias barely heard. Each word felt like a stone added to the weight already in his chest. When he stepped outside, the light had dimmed. The wind carried the smell of rain and mud. He looked toward the horizon, the direction of Clara's cabin, and something in him twisted. He'd told himself he didn't owe her anything. But truth has a way of whispering louder than pride. 2 days later, Clara rode into town to restock supplies. She'd avoided Elias since the river, half out of caution, half out of fear for what she might feel if she saw him again. But as she tied her horse outside the church, she heard voices through the open door. Reverend Langley's deep tone, patient and certain. "The lady from Centener. Louis will arrive next week. You're doing the proper thing. Elias, your children will thank you." Then Elias's voice. "DeFleur. Yes, Reverend. It's the right thing to do." Clara froze. The word struck her harder than Hobson's threat. The right thing. Proper? Respectable. She turned before they could see her and walked quickly back to the wagon. The sound of her boots swallowed by the mud. The sky had darkened to the color of pewter. Thunder rumbled again. Far off, but coming closer. Clara gripped the reins and drove out of town. Yaw set, eyes fixed on the road ahead. She'd survived winters, storms, and widowhood. She could survive this too. But as the first raindrops hit her face, she realized something she didn't want to admit. She hadn't wanted Elias Ward to be proper. She'd wanted him to be brave. The wind tore through the valley, carrying the smell of rain and sorrow. And as she rode alone through the gathering storm, her heart whispered the truth that her pride refused to say aloud. Pride's a fine coat until the wind cuts through it. The rain came without warning, not a drizzle, but a steady, drumming downpour that turned the valley to gray. It had been 4 days since Clara had last ridden into town. 4 days since she'd heard Elias Ward agree to meet the widow from St. Louis. In that time, she'd spoken to no one, seen no one, and slept barely at all. There are storms that rage outside, and storms that wait inside a person. She was caught between both. On that 4th evening, Elias saddled his horse and rode through the rain. He didn't have a plan, only a need, the kind that sits heavy in a man's chest until it drives him out into the weather. The town faded behind him, the lanterns of Iron Creek, swallowed by mist. He rode toward the place where he knew she'd go when she needed to remember who she was, the small cemetery on the ridge above the creek, where the grass never quite grew straight. He found her there, kneeling by a simple headstone, coat soaked through, hair plastered to her face. Her hands rested on the stone like she was steadying herself against the earth, even through the rain. Elias could see she'd been crying for some time. He dismounted, slow and quiet. "Clara," he said, his voice low, almost lost to the rain. She didn't turn. "Go home." "Elias, I can't." She let out a bitter laugh. "You always could before." He stepped closer, the rain drumming on his hat brim, running down his collar. "Not this time." Finally, she looked up at him, eyes red, cheeks streaked with rain and tears. "I told him I'd never love again," she said. "Right here, on this ground, I told Henry that loving him meant I'd stay faithful to his memory, that I'd never let another man in. I kept that promise. Elias. I kept it until I couldn't breathe from the weight of it." Her voice broke, then steadied. "I'm so tired. Tired of being strong. Tired of pretending I don't need anyone." He knelt beside her, mud soaking through his pants, water pooling around them both. "You don't have to pretend," he said softly. "Yes, I do. Because you're marrying that woman. Because you're doing the right thing, the proper thing. And I'm the fool who thought maybe you wanted more than proper." Elias shook his head, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "I'm not marrying her." Clara blinked, startled. "I heard you. I know what you heard. And I was wrong." He swallowed hard. "I said yes because I thought that's what decency looked like. Because I thought the only way to keep my children safe was to do what the town expected. But what's proper isn't always what's right." He reached out, hesitated, then touched her hand cold, trembling, alive. "When my wife was dying," he said quietly, "she told me to find them a mother. For years I thought that meant replacing her, finding someone polite and soft-spoken, the kind that never stirred talk. But it doesn't mean that. It means finding someone who'll fight the storm beside me. Someone who's already weathered her own." Clara's tears mixed with the rain. "Elias, the town will destroy us both. You know that." He gave a small, broken laugh. "They already tried. I'm still here." The wind rose, whipping her hair across her face. He brushed it back gently, his hand lingering against her cheek. "You once told me storms reveal who we are." He said, "Well, here we are, drenched, bruised, and still standing." She shook her head, her breath catching. "I don't know if I can do this again, lose someone. Fight everyone. You won't lose me." He said simply, "Not if you don't walk away." Clara stared at him, the man the town whispered about. The man she'd pulled half dead from the snow. The man who'd made her feel alive again without ever asking for permission. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of her husband's grave as a chain. She felt it as an anchor, holding her steady while she decided whether to reach for the horizon. She whispered, almost to herself, "I'm afraid." "So am I." He said, "Then we'll be afraid together." Something in her broke, then not the kind of breaking that destroys, but the kind that lets light in. She leaned forward, pressed her forehead to his, the rain running down between them. When their lips met, it wasn't sweet or perfect. It was desperate, two people clawing their way back to life. They pulled apart, breathless, faces inches apart. She laughed through the tears. A raw sound that startled even her. "We're a mess," he smiled. That quiet, tired smile she'd come to trust. Best kind of mess I've ever seen. For a while, they just stayed there, the widow and the rancher, kneeling in the mud among the graves. Thunder rolling across the hills. The rain washed the dirt from the stones, the bitterness from their hearts. And if the dead were listening, Clara hoped they understood love doesn't erase what came before, it carries it forward, like a river carrying its source. When she finally rose, Elias stood beside her. They looked at the names carved in stone, her husband's. His wife's, the promises kept and broken, the ones remade in the same breath. "Love don't ask if you're ready," Elias said quietly. "It just shows up and dares you to stay standing." Clara reached for his hand, laced her fingers through his, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel cold. The rain still fell. The graves still waited. The town would still talk, but for that one moment, standing under the open sky, she finally let herself believe that maybe love wasn't a betrayal after all. Maybe it was survival. The morning of the foreclosure hearing broke sharp and clear. The kind of cold that burns in the lungs. Iron Creek was awake early, its streets humming with rumor. Everyone knew what was coming, and everyone wanted to see it. By noon, the town hall was packed. Men from the mines, their faces lined with soot and worry. Women clutching shawls, whispering behind gloved hands. And at the front, sitting tall behind a polished table, was Mr. Hobson, the banker, clean as a coin, eyes bright with victory. He shuffled the papers before him like a priest preparing a sermon. "Mrs. Hensley," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You've had ample time to settle your account. Do you have the payment?" From the back of the room, Clara stood. Her hands were clasped, her face pale but steady. "No," she said. "Not in full." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Hobson smiled. That thin, patient smile that had already buried half the county in debt. "Then, under the terms of your mortgage," he continued, "the property known as Hensley's Mercantile reverts to the bank effective immediately." He leaned forward, savoring each word. "Unless, of course, you are prepared to reconsider my earlier offer." Clara's voice was calm but sharp as flint. "I told you before, Mr. Hobson, I'll not sell myself to pay what I owe." The silence that followed was heavy enough to choke on. Hobson's jaw tightened. "Then you leave me no choice." He picked up his pen, poised to sign the foreclosure notice. That's when a voice cut through the hall low. Firm, unmistakable. "Wait." Every head turned. Elias Ward stepped forward, his hat in his hands, his children close behind. He looked like he'd come straight from the fields, dust still clinging to his coat. But his eyes were clear, steady as iron. Hobson frowned. "Mr. Ward, this is not your concern." Elias set a rolled document on the table. "It is now. I'm offering my ranch as collateral for Mrs. Hensley's debt." The room erupted gasps, whispers, the scrape of boots on wood. Even Reverend Langley's composure cracked. "Elias, think carefully. That's your land, your children's future." "I am thinking carefully," Elias said. "My children wouldn't have a father if it weren't for her. She saved my life. Now it's my turn." Hobson's smirk returned. You'd bankrupt yourself for a woman who's already ruined her reputation. Elias didn't flinch. I'd do it for my family. And she's part of it. From the crowd came a small voice, trembling but strong. It was Samuel, Elias' son. Miss Clara saved Papa when no one else would. She didn't care what people said. The little girl beside him, Lydia, tugged her father's sleeve and spoke up. Too. She braids my hair like Mama used to. I love her. You could have heard a pin drop. Clara's hand went to her mouth. The crowd shifted, something stirring. Something human that no sermon could teach. In the second row, Silas Boone, an old rancher with a limp and a lifetime of hard winters behind him, rose to his feet. His voice carried over the room like a hammer striking steel. Mr. Hobson, he said, you call this justice, I call it greed. Hobson turned red. This is lawful procedure. Mr. Boone, lawful. Maybe, the old man said, but decent, not a bit. He pulled a folded paper from his coat, a bank draft. I'll cover her debt myself, in full. And I'll do it because a town that forgets mercy won't last one more winter. For a heartbeat. No one moved. Then someone clapped one sharp sound. Then another. Soon, the hall was full of it applause. Cheers. The sound of Iron Creek remembering what it meant to be decent. Hobson's face went white. This is irregular. He sputtered. The council must approve any. Reverend Langley, his earlier sermon now hanging like a millstone, stood. The council will approve it, he said. And perhaps we should all ask ourselves what sort of town we've been building. Hobson gathered his papers, his dignity fraying like old cloth. I see the council lacks the stomach for proper business. He snapped. He turned toward Clara. Congratulations, Mrs. Hensley. You've won your pity parade. And with that, he stormed out. The sound of his boots fading down the hallway. When the door slammed, the room exhaled as one. Clara just stood there, stunned. Then Elias came to her, his voice quiet. It's over. She shook her head, still dazed. You shouldn't have risked your land, he smiled. That calm, easy smile that had melted so much silence between them. I didn't have to. Turns out there's still a few good souls left in this town. Old Silas Boone stepped forward, resting a hand on her shoulder. Don't thank me, ma'am, he said. Just remember what this feels like, folks. Standing together. You keep that alive. And maybe Iron Creek will, too. Clara tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she nodded, tears mixing with the last drops of rain that still clung to her hair. Outside, the clouds broke open and sunlight poured through the town hall windows, warm and golden against the wooden floor. Elias took her hand, rough fingers curling gently around hers. The children ran to her, arms around her waist, laughter bubbling through the room like the first breath of spring. And in that moment, Iron Creek changed, not because a debt was paid, but because the people remembered what mattered most. Mercy, not gossip. Compassion, not pride. Love, not propriety. A town that forgets mercy, Silas Boone had said, won't last one more winter. That day, Iron Creek remembered and found itself warm again. Spring came gentle to Iron Creek, the kind of spring that doesn't rush, but lingers, patient and warm, like it knows how much the land has suffered, The snow melted down into the earth, feeding the grass, the wildflowers, and the dreams that had nearly died there. The fences stood mended, the fields green again, and for the first time in years, the air smelled not of smoke or fear, but of life. The town had changed maybe a little, maybe enough. People still talked, as towns always do, but the sharpness had faded. Now, when folks mentioned Clara and Elias Ward, they spoke with quiet respect, not scandal. The gossip had turned into a story, and that story had turned into hope. At the edge of town, the Ward homestead had taken on new life. The garden, once overgrown with weeds, now bloomed with beans, roses, and morning glories that crawled along the porch rail. The barn roof no longer leaked. A new corral stretched out toward the hills, and in it, a young foal, long-legged and curious, chased the sunlight across the grass. Inside the cabin, 2 candles burned on the mantel, one for Henry Hensley, Clara's late husband, and one for Anna Ward, Elias's first love. They burned not in grief, but in remembrance, quiet symbols of lives that had shaped the ones still here. Every evening, Clara lit them both. Elias never asked her to stop. It had been 3 months since the town hall meeting, 3 months since the town that once whispered had finally chosen compassion over pride. Clara and Elias were married under the cottonwood tree behind the cabin. No pomp, no sermon, just Elder Boone, the children as witnesses, and the sound of the wind moving through the branches like a hymn. Clara wore a simple blue dress, the same one she'd worn the day she helped Elias out of the snow. Elias gave her a silver ring plain, worn, but chosen with care. She'd told him she didn't need it. He told her he did. Now, the days began early and ended with the kind of tired that feels honest. They worked side by side, she in the garden, he in the barn. The children ran barefoot through the mud, chasing chickens that never stayed where they were meant to. The sound of laughter replaced the echoes of fear. And each night, after supper, they sat on the porch with coffee in hand, watching the sun fall behind the ridge, the world painted gold. One afternoon, Mrs. Dugan stopped by with a jar of preserves. She'd once been among the loudest whisperers. Now she lingered on the porch, talking about the weather, asking about the foal. Others followed neighbors who'd stayed away too long, bringing small gifts, small apologies. Clara met each one with the same quiet grace. Forgiveness, she'd learned, was easier to give than to expect. Elias watched her, always with that steady look, proud, peaceful, still a little amazed that, after all the storms, this was what remained. Home. Not perfect, but real. That evening, as the light softened and the first stars began to show, Clara stood at the garden fence, the smell of lilac heavy in the air. Elias came up beside her, brushing a bit of dirt from his hands. "Garden's looking strong," he said. "It's the soil," she answered. "Hard at first, but it holds on to what you plant." He smiled. "Guess that's us." Then she looked out at the field, at the children chasing the foal, their laughter carrying over the wind. "Maybe," she said softly, "maybe it is." They walked back to the porch, the lantern light glowing warm through the windows. Inside, the 2 candles flickered beside the photographs of those who came before, reminders that love doesn't erase the past. It just gives it a place to rest. Clara's voice carried gently over the night air. We plant what we hope to keep: courage, kindness, love that endures the frost. And if we're lucky, it takes root, even in hard ground. The wind moved through the pines like a song half remembered. Fireflies blinked above the garden, the stars mirrored in every glint of dew. And for once, Iron Creek felt whole. My friends, that's the story of the Widow of Iron Creek. A story about second chances, hard ground, and the kind of love that survives the cold. If this tale touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments below, where are you listening from tonight? What did this story make you feel? And if you believe that mercy and courage still have a place in this world, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little light, and subscribe to Western Tales, where every week we keep the spirit of the frontier alive, one story at a time. Until next time, ride steady, stay warm, and remember, even in the hardest winters, something good is always waiting to grow.